I had typed those numbers for 18 straight hours. My eyes were red from caffeine and the glare of a white screen. My heart felt as hollow as the report I was about to submit. Not because I lacked data. I knew exactly what those numbers would lead to, how many goods would leave the ports, how many billions in trade would flow, how many applause lines it would earn. But there was one thing I couldn't measure: the cost borne by the people whose names would never appear in that report. I used to believe I was just a data guy, the one who provided the numbers, not the one who made the decisions. But you know something? Sometimes the person who writes the report makes a choice simply by staying silent. And that night, I stayed silent. The president was preparing to announce new tariffs on Vietnam, a 20% hike on exports, 40% on transshipped goods. My team and I had run every scenario, every model, every projection. Profit? Checked. Stability? Checked. But there was an uneasy silence inside my chest I couldn't explain. I thought of my father, a war veteran, who once told me, "Not every victory is glorious. Some triumphs become burdens we carry for years." That line had never sounded more haunting, especially as I lifted my hand to sign the final line of the report. I don't know where I had fallen. It wasn't a hospital, it wasn't a dream, it wasn't heaven, and it certainly wasn't hell. It was a vast, silent space without walls, without a ceiling, without light. Just numbers floating in the air. Charts I had written, tariffs I had approved, projections I had signed off on. But strangely, no one was reading them. No debates, no applause, no praise. They simply drifted past me like fragments of a structure I once believed was an achievement. Then I saw faces. A Vietnamese woman, balancing goods on her shoulders in the rain, was standing outside a warehouse denied entry. A Black American man, unemployed, staring at a gas station sign after tariffs sent prices soaring. A small child in a thin coat, shivering in winter because his mother lost her job when the appliance factory faced retaliatory trade penalties. None of them said a word. They just looked at me. Not with anger, not with blame, just silence. I turned away, but there was no way out. I kept walking. Each step revealed another decision I had signed, another policy I had helped analyze. And each one of them was a real human life, a real story. Have you ever stopped to imagine it? What you write on paper might become someone's tears, their sweat, or the meal they have to skip. Then I began to hear a voice, deep, calm, as if it came from inside me. It spoke slowly, every word deliberate. The success of a nation isn't found in its growth, but in who gets to grow and who gets sacrificed for it. I wanted to respond, to argue, to explain, but I couldn't speak, because each time I opened my mouth, a number appeared in front of me, a number I had once used to represent an entire country. GDP, trade balance, quarterly growth. But that child didn't need GDP, he needed shoes. And that Vietnamese mother didn't need to understand import laws. She just needed to sell her goods to survive. If you were the last person to see the truth behind a policy, would you dare to speak it? Or would you stay silent, like I once did? Amid the vast chamber of invisible decisions, I saw a familiar figure walking toward me. He wasn't young anymore. His steps were steady but slow. His uniform was worn at the shoulders, and his eyes carried the weight of things I had never dared to imagine. It was my father. Not the version of him I remembered in life, but a version more awakened, more silent, and sharper than any speech I had ever heard in Congress. He didn't embrace me. He didn't scold me. He just stood there and asked, "Do you know what you're doing to this country?" I wanted to say I was just a small part, just someone who gathered data, ran analyses, and forecasted outcomes. I didn't write the laws, I didn't sign the orders, but those words stuck in my throat. He continued, "When I was on the battlefield, every wrong decision could cost a life. But you write decisions no one sees the casualties of, so you think you're not responsible." I trembled, not because I was being accused, but because there was no bitterness in his voice, only a truth I could no longer deny. I had lived in spreadsheets, believing that logic alone was enough, but I had forgotten this. Every calculation without compassion is violence in lethal disguise. My father stepped closer and handed me a sheet of paper. There was only one line written on it. If you were allowed to return, what would you change? I froze. I had written hundreds of draft pages, revised budget lines, and analyzed data point by point. But never, not once, had I written a single sentence from my heart. I had never asked, will someone live better because of what I wrote? The question echoed in my mind like a bell ringing into emptiness. If every policy is a brick, do you know what you're building? A shelter or an invisible prison? I didn't have an answer, but I knew this. If I ever got the chance to return, I would not write the same way again. I would question everything before signing. I would pause to see the people behind the numbers. So, if you were granted a return from the edge of death, what would be the first thing you do? What would you look back on? And who would you apologize to first? I woke up to the steady beeping of the heart monitor. The harsh white light of the hospital ceiling made me squint. The nurse smiled gently. "Mr. Miller, you were unconscious for nearly 4 minutes, but all your vitals are stable now." I didn't respond right away, because what stirred inside me wasn't concerned about the next deadline or the 9 a.m. meeting. It was a silence, sharp and thin like a blade, slowly peeling away the old skin of detached habits. The first thing I asked for wasn't the next trade report. I asked for a pen and paper. I needed to write, not too brief, but to come back to life. I wrote without stopping, not in the language of commerce, but in the voice of someone who had come back from the dead. I wrote about the woman selling goods in the rain, about the child shivering on the sidewalk, about my father's eyes, and the question he left me with. I titled it, "The First Report Without Metrics, Only Conscience." When I returned to the office, I looked at my colleagues as if seeing them for the first time. They hadn't changed, but I was no longer the same. I didn't argue, I didn't rebel. I simply began to ask questions. I asked, do we have anyone representing small Vietnamese businesses in this proposal? Has anyone here spoken with American farmers hurt by tariff shifts? Have we ever assessed the emotional toll of this policy? People looked at me like I'd just come through a fever, but I didn't care, because I knew if no one else would ask, I would be the first. I proposed a social impact review team. No budget, not mandatory, just there, so someone might read it, even if it was just one person. Because sometimes all it takes is one pause, one question, and it's enough to change how a policy touches real lives. I didn't need recognition. I just needed to be heard, or at the very least understood, that some policies don't need to be technically right. They just need to be right for the people they affect. So let me ask you this. Have you ever stopped to wonder if the decisions you make each day might be hurting someone you've never met? And if they are, would you have the courage to rewrite them with eyes now wide open? On June 28, 2025, just 4 days before former President Trump was set to announce a new tariff package that would send shockwaves through the global markets, I received a strange email. No subject line, no clear sender address, just one name, Lan, Long On. I opened it. The English was broken but earnest, so sincere that I couldn't stop reading. She wrote that she used to work at a factory producing goods for the American market. The job had been steady, her income just enough to support her 2 children. But then a new trade policy was passed. Just one line in that agreement caused the factory to lose its contracts. Layoffs followed, in waves. She wrote, "I do not blame you. I just want you to know that every line in a policy you write can either be someone's dinner or their ending." I read that line again and again. Each word struck a place inside me I thought had long gone numb from years of risk assessments and economic modeling. I used to think I understood what a balanced trade agreement meant, but for the first time, I realized it smells like sweat and tastes like saltwater tears. I printed out the letter, every word. I didn't trim a single line. I pinned it on the corkboard behind my desk. A coworker passing by asked, "Is that from someone you know?" I shook my head. No. And that's exactly why I need to read it every day. Have you ever received a message from the other side of the world that somehow woke you up from the other side of your conscience? And if a stranger dared to write down the truth, would you have the courage to rewrite something for them in return? I turned on my computer. My hands trembled, not from fear of reprimand, but because for the first time in 16 years of government work, I was about to write something that wasn't meant to be cleared by a superior. I titled it, "Interning Memo, not addressed to anyone, but hoping someone will read." I began with a question. If every tax line can impact millions of lives, why do our policy reports never include even one line about actual people? I wrote about the faces I saw during my near-death experience, about the mother carrying goods through the rain, about the retired father who couldn't understand why his medication costs had suddenly gone up, about the child, too young for school, who already knew what it meant to lose electricity because their family couldn't afford the bill. I wrote without charts, without references, not because I didn't have the data, but because I didn't need to prove anything. I simply needed to testify, as someone who had glimpsed the other side of death. Then I wrote, if a policy succeeds economically but fails in basic humanity, can we still call it a success? I didn't know who would read it, but I sent it, not through the official system. I printed a copy and placed it on the coffee table in the meeting lounge, right where most people usually ignore anything not labeled urgent. I wasn't looking for feedback. I just hoped someone might pause, even for 5 seconds. And then, the unexpected happened. The next morning, I found a handwritten note beside my memo. Thank you. I was once a child growing up in a Detroit housing project. Your report reminded me why I started this job in the first place. I don't know who wrote it, but I knew then I was no longer alone. Have you ever written something no one asked for? Not for a grade, not for a performance review, just because your conscience told you it was time. And if just one person reads it and changes one decision, wasn't it worth it? July 3rd, 2025. One day after former President Donald Trump announced a new round of tariffs targeting Asian trade partners, I was called into an unscheduled emergency meeting with the Office of the Trade Policy Advisor. There was no official subject line, no calendar invite, just a personal message from the Deputy Advisor's assistant. Mr. Miller, your memo has been circulating. That day's meeting had no PowerPoint, no spreadsheets, no supply chain graphs. Just a group of people who had once sat in the room when Trump first signed the 2018 tariff orders, now gathered again, this time facing a question that had never before made it to the table. Are we repeating the same cycle, but with wider and deeper consequences? They invited me to speak, not as a policy analyst, but as someone who had gone to the edge of death and returned with different eyes. I didn't defend, I didn't propose, I simply shared. About the letter from Vietnam, about my father's eyes in that vision, about the handmade fabric pouch, and the question stitched into its meaning, who are we writing for? A senior advisor, one who had helped draft major trade legislation, quietly said, "We used to think we were writing for the country, but now I wonder, what is a country if not the individual lives shaped by every line of tax policy we authorize?" The room fell silent. No one argued, no one objected, but I could feel it. At that moment, a door opened. Not a policy door, a moral one. And sometimes, just one door like that is enough. Have you ever stood before those in power and said something that silenced the room, not from opposition, but from something deeper, something human? If you ever get the chance to do that, what would you say? We live in an age where data is considered the highest measure of truth. But no spreadsheet can calculate the pain of a mother who lost her job because of a single tariff adjustment. No economic model can see the child who drops out of school because both parents were laid off in a disrupted supply chain. We need smart policy, but we also need compassionate policy. We must be strong at the negotiation table, but we must be humble in the aftermath. And most importantly, we do not write laws for a country. We write them for the human beings who live within it. If you ever get to write again, write as if the person you love most will have to live under that policy. Because once you've seen life from the other side of death, you don't write the same way again.